Now, as we do so many weeks here at the Daly Dose, we need to get over to our Daly Dose Top 5. This week celebrates the 9-year anniversary of the Daly Dose Sports Podcast. But, it is interesting to think about how different this all could have gone. Back in 2013, I was a featured columnist for Bleacher Report. And I had a friend tell me that a small local publication here in Denver needed a few sports articles. So I wrote them a few articles, never thought I'd hear from them again. But then I was asked to do a guest spot on their NFL radio show here in Denver. So I did, and it went well. And the next week, I was asked to come back, and I appeared on the show again. And then when I got done with that show, I was given my own show. They were like, hey, you can have a show. You figure it out. You do what you want with it. There were a few problems. One, I didn't have a plan for a show at all. I was given my own show, but I didn't know what I was doing. I had never considered doing my own sports show. Like, how would one go about doing that? So guys around the radio station were trying to come up with show titles. And I was trying to come up with a plan for the show and what it would be about and what it would be. And so Big J, Jason McBride, came up with the name The Daly Dose. Jason has actually been on the podcast maybe a few years back. But he came up with the name one day. And he was like, you got to do something with the last name. You should be The Daly Dose. Cool. All right. I guess that's what it's going to be. And then one day I was at the station and I was actually getting ready to do my very first show. I'm really nervous. I'm not sure what I'm going to talk about. I'm kind of wondering what I'm going to do. And this guy that kind of did some engineering stuff around the studio, he actually did a lot of making t-shirts and stuff in the back. Well, he comes in the studio and he says, so what's your show going to be about? I was like, sports, I guess. I don't know. And he goes, no, I know, but what? Local sports, national sports, world sports. What is going to make your show different from the other ones? And I literally had no answer for him whatsoever. So I started to think about it and I said, well, I want to discuss all sports, the major sports especially. And I wanted to have a rule. If I was going to talk about it, it either had to be informative or I hoped it would at least be funny. That was the rule. And so from that, the Daly Dose was born. It ran for a while here in Denver. And then when the radio station folded, as they do, the podcast began. And yet, there are times that I think back to how different things could have been if I had gone a different direction that one day, because I kind of just decided it at the spur of the moment as I was going on the air. How different could this all have been? And what if I had gone with some of the other suggestions that were on the table instead of the Daly Dose? So today, our Daly Dose Top 5 is going to reveal the top 5 rejected names that we actually turned down. Hey, understand this. The butterfly effect is real. You'll see what I mean. We start off at number 5. And like I said, I had decided that I wanted to talk about sports and I wanted to cover the major sports. Hey, I love both the NFL and college football. I definitely wanted to cover them. I had experience coaching basketball. I was fortunate enough to be around some really good coaches, to be around some really good players. And so I have learned the game of basketball reasonably well. I figured I could discuss that. I'm an avid reader, and I love sports history. And for those reasons, I really think that the direction that I took was probably for the best, right? But can you imagine if I had instead gone with the show title of The Daily Guide to Magic? And I would have done a show where I discuss some of the best magic tricks that are out there. I feel like that wouldn't have been a show that I could have stuck with for 9 years, I'll be honest. I think I would have burned out. But I do know a few tricks, just so you know. I don't want to show them all, here. I don't even want to illustrate them on the video, but I do know a few tricks. Just look at my college football picks from last week. Hey, I can make your betting money disappear real fast. The Daily Guide to Magic comes in today at number 5. We move on to number 4. And if you have listened to the Daily Dose for very long, then you know there are certain things in the world that I personally dislike. I'm not always a fan of ESPN. I think sometimes they act stupidly. I do not care for the Las Vegas Raiders. Never have, and I probably never will. I absolutely abhor the idea of like hot takes and nonsensical things along those lines in the world of sports talk. And one frequent target of the Daily Dose is kind of ironic because I have family in the state of California. I love my family in California, and I encourage them whenever I can to get out of the state of California because it's kind of a mess. But can you imagine how different this podcast would have been if I had called it by another name that was suggested to me? Because Clint in California, it just would have been weird. Like me walking around in California, talking about poop on the streets, robberies at Costco, the Dodgers collapsing in the postseason, year after year after year after year. It would have been odd. It would have had a totally different feel to it. And I, for one, am glad we didn't go in that direction. Clinton, California comes in today at number 4. So we arrive at number 3. And you know, back in 2014 when we started this podcast, the Golden State Warriors would go on to win the NBA Finals where they would beat the Cleveland Cavaliers in 6 games. And we were watching this series pretty closely. And we were watching what would eventually turn into a Golden State Warriors dynasty as they would win 3 more titles after this, which is kind of crazy because growing up, Golden State wasn't good. They were awful for the most part. And then you kind of had that Run TMC thing, and then these Warriors just flipped the script. They won everything. But can you imagine if we had named our podcast not for the Warriors, but for the little underdog that overcame the odds to even play against the Warriors that season in the NBA Finals? If I had gone with the LeBron James Fan Club podcast, hey, this show would have definitely been very, very different. For one, you know how I like to read books. I think that probably would have been banned. Honesty might have also been banned. Would have been different. But as usual, hey, LeBron never gets anything to break his way. He's an underdog. He's just trying to fight through the awful teammates and the terrible coaches that he has to deal with. And he was overlooked again by me, and instead we went to Daly Dose. But the LeBron James Fan Club podcast comes in today at number 3. We reached the number 2 way that the Daly Dose Sports Podcast would have been massively different with just a different title. And this one would have been really, really strange looking back now. Hey, like I said, I have a background in coaching. I coached high school boys for a number of years, and then later I actually switched and I coached high school girls a little bit. And you know, I've talked about it here before. There were positives, there were negatives to each. I enjoyed my time coaching guys. We had some great teams. We had some great kids. I also really enjoyed coaching girls. They were really fun. And I still maintain relationships with both guys and girls that I coached back in the day. But can you imagine if we had gone with the title of this podcast being the Clint Daly WNBA Hour? I mean, we would have talked about why the WNBA players don't get paid as much as the NBA players and how the whole thing is just biased and misogynistic and why no one watches the games, and it is because of that bias against females. This podcast would have been really, really different had it been named the Clint Daly WNBA Hour. And that comes in today at number 2. So we reach the number 1 rejected title for the Daly Dose Sports Podcast back when this all started 9 years ago. And when you think of what the Daly Dose is, it is hard to think of it with this name that came in at number 1. You know, we pride ourselves on not taking ourselves too seriously. We make fun of pretentiousness. We try to look at things with rational thought. I don't want a bunch of childish emotions clouding my judgment. But can you even imagine how different all of this might have been if we had named this podcast by one of the ideas that was being thrown around? Can you imagine if instead of the Daly Dose Sports Podcast, we had called ourselves The View? Hey, in all seriousness, we say it every week, but we are genuinely thankful for each of the listeners that we do have. We are thankful for you sharing the show, for sharing the videos, for sharing the articles. I know we say it every week, but it truly is meant. If you share or like any of our work, if you listen, if you contribute in any way, thank you for the past 9 years. It is very, very much appreciated. Hey, YouTube, make sure you go over and check out the rest of the podcast because this week, of course, we are talking a lot about that college football playoff. Plus, we do have a few winners and losers in the NFL this week, and there is even an NBA story out there that you're going to want to hear too. So make sure you go over and you check out the rest of the podcast. I will leave a link here in the comments on YouTube for you. I will see you all next Wednesday. I hope you have a great week.